local expertise in the region before 1990 is fairly simple. Reading and writing skills in general still were extremely limited in the countryside, so any access to written documents in general was exceptional and left to experts. The rate of not being able to read in general in those remote areas where we worked was high, above 90%. This also is true with regard to almanacs and other folk astronomical treatises. Specialists in the study and the usage of such almanacs and treatises occurred primarily only in the Tihama lowlands and to a very limited extent in some of the oases along the eastern slopes, but hardly at all on the Tihama mountains and on the highlands and plateaus except in cities or their close vicinity. By consequence, the dissemination of scriptural star knowledge occurred much more frequently in the coastal and eastern plains than in the highlands. So what follows from these insights is the important distinction between zones and spheres of prevailing scriptural influences and the much larger zones of areas where scriptural influence was absent. Book experts in one or the other subfield of expertise usually had an influence and a respected status in these demographic minority zones of scripturalism. By contrast, what was prevailing in the highlands among the main rural and tribal populations was exclusively orally transmitted local knowledge, shared from one generation to the next within local households and villages by practical observation during the evenings and during the mornings from terraces or roofs. These observations would vary, of course, depending on whether the point of observation was oriented to the east or to the west, but otherwise the same principle and similar terminologies were followed not only within one tribe, but often far beyond. Still, as we shall see, a number of important differences became evident as regional variations in the course of our investigations. My second largest point is a very rough survey of the main forms of star observation as practiced in the region. This reveals three systems: the manazil, the giranat, and the anwa. Let us discuss how each of these functions and how they interrelate with each other, but with a strong focus on the anwa. Before that, let me just remind you that each of these three systems served seasonal, cyclical purposes rather than any chronological lineal goals. These systems usually covered only fragments, something that Michael Marx referred to as rudimentary fragments of the entire solar year. But the most important parts of the solar year, the crucial agricultural seasons, and in that sense they were indispensable. They served survival and were essential. They were not just folkloristic marginalities. The observation system of the manazil commonly is referred to as mansions of the moon, combining lunar with stellar observations by memorizing the conjunctions of certain specified ecliptic stars with the moon. By themselves, they also are a cyclical system, but they are very difficult to remember if you don't have written tools and tables by which you can orientate yourselves. Therefore, the manazil occur almost exclusively in what I called the zones of scripturalism. By contrast, the Giranat are a system of observation that also counts stellar conjunctions with the moon, like the Manazil, but in this case only one stellar phenomenon, namely the Pleiades, called in the north Al-Thuraya, while in the south, closer to the Yemen, it's called Al-Kama, or Mchima in dialect. Each year, when one needs to observe the Giranat, one has to start counting again, at least for the first lunar month, while for the subsequent months, one would then know from the outset that in each next month the conjunction would occur 2 nights earlier than in the preceding month. Hence, each month has a numerical name, 13, 11, 9, 7, etc. This succession of uneven numbers by 2 nights corresponds to the time difference between the synodic and the sidereal month. Observing the lunar station of just one star every month works very well without written sources being necessarily required, but it does so only partially for shorter periods, fragments of the year. In fact, the Giranat never occur as an entirely independent system of reckoning time in these agricultural contexts, but only as an easy monthly time marker during the less important second agricultural seasons outside the main Mawasim periods, monsoon periods. So basically, wherever the Giranat are observed, this happens only in combination with the third system, the Anwa, to which I will turn now, but maybe a first important conclusion after the distinction between zones of scripturalism and the absence of scripturalism is this second one, namely the coexistence of various forms of time orientations that by themselves are not really chronological or linear, but cyclical, and in that sense, fragments that are not calendars in our modern sense of the term. The Anwa system of time reckoning occur either alone, if there is only one main agricultural season, or in combination with the Giranat, if there are 2 such seasons. Both systems are prevailing in the mountain regions where scripturalism either was absent or extremely limited. The Anwa are strictly oriented towards the main agricultural season, and therefore they usually cover only that crucial section of the solar year, about plus minus 50% of it. Like the Giranat, observance of the Anwa normally occurs among the agricultural households of the mountain and highlands. Sometimes they also are mentioned in almanacs and other written sources of the present. The term now Anwa designates the horizontal events, that is the risings in the east or the settings in the west during the morning or evening twilight of a limited number of certain ecliptic stars. Charles Peillat already showed that the Anwa systems of observation were widely known at least since the very, very first decades of the Muslim era, and Paul Kunitsch has singled out those star names as authentic and originally Arabic, that he distinguished from more recent and from largely external terminological influences. In practice, depending on whether a household is better situated either on top or with a better view to the east or to the west, observance requires the identification of the given horizon, including ribbons of fog or dust, before sunrise or after sunset of 10 to 14 different stellar phenomena, one after the other per night or morning. First rising or setting in the morning or evening then announces the following now period of 13 to 14 stars. Anwa observation thus is fairly easy to be practiced and memorized, which is why it is almost a kind of happily shared evening or morning family entertainment party once or twice per week on many highland household roofs or terraced fields of the region at a time when there was no internet and no television in the region. Two sets of conclusion may be derived from this overview of the ethnographic present for Southwest Arabia in the 1980s and 90s for Arabia's pre-Islamic past. One conclusion concerns the same time level, namely that the simultaneous existence of a plurality of different systems of celestial observations for time reckoning within one and the same overall region is an insight to be kept well in mind. This is relevant not only for contemporary times, but also for this region's pre-Islamic past as I see it. In that overall region, at least 3 different systems have been ethnographically documented, and even in local context, it was rare that only one of them existed without any knowledge whatsoever about the others. A second set of conclusions concerns issues of relative chronology between the 3 systems discussed here. First, it should be mentioned that about 1/3 of those anwa that are observed in the region do not form any monthly conjunctions with the moon. Hence, it is quite likely that the emergence of the anwa observation system in history occurred quite independently from that of the manazil. From the fact that the manazil are mentioned in the Quran, it follows that they represent a late pre-Islamic scriptural combination of stellar and lunar observation, which in all likelihood had been adopted previously from India. The establishment of any relative chronology between the manazil and the giranat still remains open and unsolved. It could be that the giranat are a precursor, a local precursor of the manazil, but it could also be that the giranat are an impoverished simplification of a more recent age of the manazil. For the purpose of our conference, however, it is more important to consider that the anwa are the only one among the 3 surviving systems of observance that actually do conform in all these non-scriptural practices to agricultural requirements and seasonal experience. By their rhythms of almost 2 weeks for each star period, they also facilitate the fine-tuning and the preparation sequences of agricultural activities in a region where the monsoon and the cyclonic Mediterranean winds and rains are fairly regular each solar year. So by themselves, these main structural properties of Anwar's observance make it already highly probable indeed that this is the most ancient tradition of practiced time reckoning in Southwest Arabia's rural peripheries. Hence, in terms of a relative chronology, there is little doubt that the Anwar system of time reckoning has to be much older than the manazil system. The point is, in fact, further enhanced if, in the end, you allow me a very short look at the Anwar terminology of the star names as it has prevailed up to the 1980s. In such a perspective, the present map, which I drafted for my habilitation in the 1990s, and which is therefore quite old, gives you a rough overview of how things occur in the ethnographic present in their spatial distribution. In short, the closer to Al-Da'if these star names occur, the closer they are to classical Arabic Fusha, marked by lighter shades on the map. By contrast, the closer to Sana'a they occur, the darker the icons on the map are. Here, more stellar terms occur that either are not rooted at all in Fusha, but in pre-Arabic Sabaean and Himyarite vocabulary, or that are such authentic and original Fusha star names in words that do not represent any manazil at all. This combined distinction by two criteria is based on respective consultations with experts and with specialized dictionaries. Without going into any further details here, this spatial and ethnographic overview of star terms in the 1980s displays a much higher occurrence of stellar terms with either authentic and original non-manazil fusha meaning, or with explicit pre-Arabic roots to the southeast, and a much lower occurrence to the northwest. So this is the result of my and our examination in the field of that star terminology that is directly practiced and associated to the usage of anwa in connection with agricultural contexts. Let me just end this section by pointing out to you that the most important pre-Arabic anwa star names in active usage were al-Kama or Imchima for Thuraya, the Pleiades, and Alan, but not as a season, but for 4 stars in Al-Asad, the lion, while the most important authentic original Arabic terms that are not designating any manazil but are in practical use are Jawza, Orion, and Suhail, Canopus, or Alpha Carinae. Walter Müller has confirmed the occurrence of Al-Kama Imchima for ancient Semitic source contexts such as Ethiopia and Mesopotamia, and Alan, as we have already seen repeatedly by previous speakers, has long been identified by several authors as a month name in the Himyarite calendar. There is an incredible amount of folk tales, proverbs, and legends related to these 4, but especially to the Pleiades, but I cannot go into any of that here. As a final summary, I would like to first again propose the hypothesis that one or several Anwa versions as fragments, as cyclical and non-chronological fragments, may very well have played a central part of how pre-Islamic rural population groups in the densely populated peripheries observed their main agricultural seasons without written tools, by preparing their terraces, dams, and plain fields for the raining seasons and subsequent activities. There is little doubt that the lunisolar or solar calendar systems in the centers of ancient South Arabia's polities required written tools of calculation. Star observation therefore merely played a secondary but supportive role in these Himyari official written yearly calendars. From a technical point of view, it couldn't have been more than that, but supportive and supplementary. Yet that the corresponding zones of scripturalism at the time could not be any wider than they were in the 1980s, rather smaller. So the documentation of the ethnographic present may demonstrate that the simultaneous coexistence of a plurality of systems of time reckoning was well understood for agricultural purposes in the region. And also inside the centers, the observance of the Anwa may have been an additional tool to check the accuracy of the official calendars that were in use by direct observation. Let me come to an end by referring to an article by Norbert Nebes from last summer, where, among other things, referring primarily to the Sabaean goddess or deity of Al-Makka, he also reminds us of the interesting section in Al-Hamdani's Kitab al-Jawharatain al-Atikatain. On the dinars and dirhams of Himyar, Al-Hamdani writes in English translation, were the image of the sun, the moon, and the stars, because they worshipped them. They worshipped them. Among them, their name is Aftar, the moon is HBS, the stars are Alamika, The singular is Almak and Yalmak. So whether neighbors is right or wrong, I leave to the experts, but what is important in this section from Al-Hamdani is that he addresses the relevance of star observation as an almost holy activity in pre-Islamic times. Thank you very much.